You know, when we think about handwriting these days, it's so easy to just write it off as an old skill, right? Something keyboards made obsolete. But what if the physical act of forming letters with a pencil is actually one of the most powerful and most overlooked tools for building strong readers? Well, today we're going to dig into that hidden connection between the hand and the brain.
This quote just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? Handwriting isn't about making pretty letters for a greeting card. It's about training the brain. The quality of a child's handwriting isn't just a sign of how neat they are, it's actually a window into how their brain is processing information, and that has a huge impact on their ability to read.
Okay, so this is where we really bust a huge myth. On one side, you have the common view, what a lot of us were taught, that handwriting is all about neatness, discipline, or just how nice it looks. But the science? It tells a totally different story. It's not really about aesthetics. It's about reading fluency. It's not just about discipline. It's about literally encoding letters into the brain's long-term memory. So let's dive into that first big idea. Why getting hung up on how neat the writing is completely misses the point. We're about to see how the actual process of making letters has consequences that go way, way beyond the page.
See, when a kid doesn't learn how to form letters correctly and, really importantly, consistently, it just kicks off this whole chain of problems. They start mixing up letters that look alike, like B and D. Their reading slows right down because their brain is spending all its energy just trying to figure out what the letters are. And look, this isn't about the child not trying hard enough. It's the direct result of their brain not having a solid, reliable motor plan for each letter.
So how does this even work? I mean, how can moving a pencil on paper actually make someone a better reader? This is where things get really cool, where we get into the actual neuroscience of it all. It's actually a pretty clear four-step journey from the hand to the brain. It all starts with teaching the correct, consistent way to make a letter. That physical act, done over and over, creates muscle memory. Pretty soon, the brain doesn't have to think about how to make the letter A anymore. It just knows. And that automation, that's the whole ballgame. Because once recognizing a letter is totally automatic, the brain is finally free to do the real work, understanding what the words actually mean.
The key thing to remember here is consistency. It's everything. Your brain is basically a pattern-finding machine. So if a child writes the letter C 3 different ways, the brain can't lock in one strong, clear motor pattern for it. And without that solid pattern, the process never becomes automatic. The mental effort stays high, and it slows down both writing and reading.
Now, there's a fancy name for this whole process. It's called orthographic mapping. It's how we all learn to store words so we can recognize them in a split second. I mean, think about it. You don't sound out the word "the" every single time you see it, right? You just know it. Well, handwriting, because you're physically making the letters and connecting them to their sounds, is like a superhighway for building up that mental word library.
And look, the science completely backs this up. If you look at brain scans, the difference is just wow. Physically writing a letter by hand lights up the reading parts of the brain way more intensely than just typing it or even tracing it. That act of creating the letter from scratch is what forges the strongest connection in the brain. Okay, so how do we actually build this foundation? Let's get practical. To really harness this power, we need to follow a few simple but pretty much non-negotiable rules for forming letters that make all the difference.
All right, these are the big ones, the fundamentals. Rule 1, always start letters from the top. This one simple habit prevents so many common mistakes and letter reversals. 2, always move left to right, which just naturally reinforces the direction we read. And 3, keep the height and size of letters consistent. This is a huge help for the brain.
And that last point about size, it's so important. See, our brains are hardwired to recognize the shape of a word based on these patterns of tall, small, and tail letters. When a child's writing has letters that are all over the place in size, it creates a kind of visual static. It forces the brain to slow down and decode letter by letter, instead of just grabbing the whole word shape at a glance.
Which brings us to a question I know trips up a ton of parents and teachers. Why is the B and D reversal so incredibly common? Is there something wrong with their eyes?
And the answer, almost always, is no. It's not a vision problem, it's a motor pattern problem. Think about it. If a child starts the letter B from the bottom, their hand makes a circle first and then a line. Well, that movement is dangerously similar to how they might make a D. But if you teach them to always start from the top for a B, a line down, then up and around, you create a totally distinct motor pattern that the brain just can't get confused. So on top of forming the letters themselves, you've got these 3 kind of invisible rules that are just as crucial for making text easy to read. consistent spacing between words, keeping all the letters sitting nicely on the baseline, and making sure the letter sizes are uniform. All of these work together to make a page of text much easier for the brain to process quickly.
All right, we've talked about the why and the what. So how do we actually do this? How do we teach it effectively? Let's check out some simple, proven techniques that really work, whether you're in a classroom or just helping out at home.
What's so great about these methods is that they're multisensory. They engage more of the brain. The whole skygrass root idea gives kids a really clear visual for where tall, small, and tail letters should go. Rainbow tracing makes practice less of a chore and helps groove in that motor path. And air writing, just writing big letters in the air, that uses large muscle groups, which can actually help lock in that muscle memory even faster.
And this three-step process is just a really solid step-by-step way to teach it. First, you have the child trace the letter so they can feel the correct way to move their hand. Then they copy it while looking at a good example. And finally, for the real test, they try to write it from memory. It's a simple progression that builds mastery and, just as importantly, confidence.
And that really brings us to our big final idea here. I think this quote just sums it all up perfectly. Good handwriting isn't just some fancy decoration you add on at the end. It is the very foundation. It's the architecture that the rest of literacy is built on.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? The payoff is huge. Seriously, this isn't just about neat writing. When we take the time to build this fundamental skill, we are directly helping kids become more fluent readers, helping them remember things better, and ultimately helping them become more successful learners in every single subject.
And all this leaves us with one last pretty big question to think about. In a world that's rushing faster and faster toward keyboards and screens, if handwriting really is the foundation of literacy, how strong of a foundation are we building for our kids right now?